burdens and your parcels of remorse. Every seed will one day just leave us. Use your time well, because it's loads of you untrust. Today is heroism. Today is falling away. We're not confined to ashes. We are the link, not the chain.
Well, hello. Diana, I think you should be in, not me.
Can you hear me? Ah. Oh.
Well, hello, Internet. This is Diana's live stream.
Hi. Great to see you all. Hooray. Thank you very much, Tommaso, for coming. I'm really excited about today's topic. So if you're with us live now, it would be great to know where you're from. So do say hello in the chat. We're going to have people from UK, people from USA, people from all over. And my guest today is Tommaso Zillio of Music Theory for Guitar. And we're going to be talking about melody. And I've learned so much about various different compositional things from Tommaso over the years. So I know everyone is going to get a huge amount out of this. And I've got a lot of questions for you. I'll see how many I can fit in. If you have questions in the chat, please do post them and we'll try and get Tommaso to answer them.
We like to answer the audience questions. So if anybody has questions, write them there. We are going to catch as many of them as we can.
Yes, and please also let us know if you can't hear something, if there's anything that's distorted or any problems with the audio, let us know. We'll try and fix that. So, Tommaso, where to start? What do you think we could describe as a good melody?
Ooh, we start with the easy questions. Okay. Easy melody. Well, I will start to define what is a melody, actually,
Okay,
because people seem to be confused about that. But essentially, if you can sing it, it's a melody. Okay, and this means a few things. First of all, it should be one note at a time, not several notes. You should be able to sing it, and you can do, except for Tibetan singers with strange throat sound, most of us can do one note at a time with their voice. And so that's what we want. And the second thing is that it should be singable by a human voice. So it shouldn't be too fast, too high, too low, with too much of an extension, etc. This seems kind of like a silly restriction because we have instruments that can do things that the voice cannot do. But the thing is that our ear perceives things as a melody if it is inside certain limitation. If you go too fast, all those extra notes, if you shred on the guitar, all those extra notes are not perceived as a melody. They're perceived as an ornamentation, if you want, or other things, but not as a melody. Otherwise, every shredder will be a great melodist too, which is exactly what people complain about the shredders, that they're not. Okay, so that would be one thing. And also, if the extension is too high, if you get notes too low and notes too high, so you extend the range of a single human voice, then it doesn't feel connected anymore. It doesn't feel like you have a melody. It feels like you have different things at different places. And by the way, the range of a human voice, there are people who can sing 7 octaves and good for them, but the range of a normal person human voice is between 1 octave and 2 octaves. Okay, again, professional singers can typically do more than that. But when you write a melody, I will stay inside an octave and a half, which is an octave and a fifth, okay? So we will start with that. That was what we define as melody, or I define as melody. You guys do whatever you want, okay? So I will start here. Then, what is a good melody? I'm going to give a cheeky definition here, and I say a good melody is a melody that people remember and sing. So like an earworm, okay? Something that you listen to once and then you can remember and then you can sing it again. Okay, something memorable. That's the idea. And it's a very vague definition, but that's what we are trying to do. We are trying to appeal to people. If people listen to a melody once or twice and then they can remember it and they can sing it, I think we got it. Okay, it's what we want. try to be remembered by our audience. I mean, what do you think?
I think, yeah, and I think the question of what we want the melody to accomplish is quite important in deciding whether it's a good melody or not. Like, is it fit for purpose? So there might be some places where a melody doesn't move around very much, but we're really able to establish some kind of musical starting point. And then there may be another section in a composition where the melody moves around more and it's more adventurous. And you might describe that as better or more interesting, compositionally speaking, but we wouldn't experience it necessarily as richer if we hadn't had things set up with a melody that maybe, according to certain definitions, could be more sort of less adventurous. So I think the question of where you are and what the melody is supposed to be accomplishing in that section of the composition and what else is happening is important in whether it's fit for purpose. So I quite like the idea of things being fit for purpose rather than good as a criteria.
Yes.
But I was interested in your comment about about the point about how many notes per second we can hear. I think somebody, possibly Mike Philippoff, said it was 12 notes per second. Like, that's the fastest number of notes that we can hear. And even so, even at that speed, we can't hear them very well. And I think that's a very interesting and helpful point to latch onto.
Well, there's not a specific limit. I think 12 will be what an untrained listener can. I don't remember the whole thing. I think you can listen up to 16 per second. It's not a big problem, honestly. At that speed, we are talking about a blur of notes anyway. It's more of an effect, like bloop, rather than single notes. This is way too fast anyway. I must go slow down a lot from there. Again, you can perceive 12 or 16 or not, around a dozen notes per second. You can probably distinguish them, but you definitely cannot sing them. So at this point, again, it's not perceived as a melody anymore. So here's the thing. There are limits, okay? The limits, the interesting thing is that every time we are fighting, for instance, against the instrument to play something. So we have wide intervallic steps, or we have a lot of speed, or other complex things, or big jumps on the fretboard. Okay, I'm talking about the guitar right now. Somehow we are doing something that will detract from the melodic quality. Or in other words, good melody are typically easy to play. Very easy to play, okay? Technically speaking. They're not easy to write. They're not even easy to transcribe. But usually good melody are easy to play. So everybody should relax and go like, regarding, do I have enough technique to play good melodies? Yes, you typically do, okay? So that's one thing. I mean, I'm not saying everything I say right now is a general rule of thumb, but there are exceptions. Okay, I'm going to make an exception immediately. I'm going to show you guys immediately a melody that goes against a few of the things I already said. Okay, and that is Hey Jude by the Beatles. Okay, Hey Jude by the Beatles have wide intervals. There is a 6 somewhere, and then or an octave, I don't remember, but it's pretty wide. It's hard to sing. The extension is a bit bigger than a normal melody, and when you hear people singing these and in the lives, and when you hear people singing that, then the crowd singing that, they are out of tune. They cannot sing that melody properly, but it's an incredibly popular melody. It's very memorable. So what's my point? A genius like Paul McCartney can write a melody that goes against a few of the general guidelines, because the guidelines are more to learn how to write melodies. Then you do whatever you want. Okay, so that's another point I want to make. Most of the things we say today are not guidelines in the sense that's the absolute truth and you have to follow it. It's more like you follow those guidelines, you write a few melodies, you get the hang of it, then eventually forget about those guidelines and just do whatever feels right. The guidelines are your training. If you never do the training, you never get to the point when you can do things as you feel like. You don't get there. You don't do this reliably. You don't gain the ability to write melodies. If you follow the guidelines at the beginning, you do gain the ability. So the point is kind of having this equilibrium. of thinking of the guideline more as a exercise to get there, as opposed to something that is real in the music. I hope I'm putting my point across here, okay? Because people tend to get trapped by the idea of, but that's the rule in music theory. That's what we do. There should never be that. Okay, it can be anything you want, but first you need to get a feeling for that. The guidelines give you a feeling for that.
Yeah, I think this question of what's legitimate is very interesting, and our attitude to what's legitimate in our own music is also something that is very helpful to notice and be quite reflective about whenever we sort of see, am I allowed to do this? I definitely spent the first 3 years of my writing, releasing, recording thing wondering if what I was doing was allowed. Is this real music? So that brings me to my next question, which is about what are some techniques that we could describe as fairly standard and accessible that we could use to create melodies. And part of that question is, how do we do it now? Or how do we do it to start with? Or how did we do it before we had any kind of music theory knowledge? And given that you're the sort of theory king, as well as an actual astrophysicist, I wonder if there might not have been a time where you didn't know music theory, or it might be so far away you can't remember it. But I definitely remember writing a lot of songs without having any theory knowledge, and I was just proceeding purely on instinct. I was, here's some chords that I like, and I'm going to hum something over top. That seems like it works. Good, that's the song. And I think, you know, it's fine to start like that. Most of us start like that, and it's not like you can't write really good things like that. You can. But it's definitely interesting when you start moving from that more instinctive mode to moving to a mode where you're using some techniques. And I think a lot of songwriters and composers can struggle with that because emotionally the sensation is different. It feels a certain way to be strumming away, just humming. It feels quite effortless in a sense, in that you're not making cognitive efforts. You're just letting things arise. Whereas when you're using a technique and you're having to think about where are the notes going next, and you might be, you know, whatever it is that you're using, you're now operating in a cognitive way, and that feels different. And some people distrust that because it's not the feeling they had when they first experimented. But I think it's really essential to understand that transition if we're going to write our best songs and our best melodies, and if we're going to have more things available to us, because otherwise you get trapped in doing the things that you instinctively do, and you're going to start repeating yourself.
Yes.
What did pre-theory Tommaso write, and how did he write?
No, I wrote a lot before I knew nearly any theory. Then at a certain point, I learned what scales were, and then I stayed in the scale for a while and wrote with that idea. And then later, I learned how chords and chord tone, and then I wrote with that idea. But see, here's the thing. Maybe because I had a different kind of approach to music theory at the very beginning, I was already writing music. It just sucked, okay? But I was already writing music, and I was thinking on how do I make it better. And so for me, theory has always been tools, okay? You mentioned the difference in cognitive, in cognitive feeling, like if it's spontaneous or deliberate. And that's the thing. When it's deliberate, for me, it's an exercise. And that's okay. I mean, I can write a song as an exercise, and the song can be good and can be published and everything. It's an exercise, though. Okay, and many great songs were written as an exercise. Okay, I actually have example. You guys know Moonlight Serenade, no? Yeah. Okay, the famous one, it's a jazz song, Glenn Miller, 1940s. Okay, that was an exercise. Glenn Miller said it was an exercise. It was an exercise on using diminished chords to pass between other chords. Melody came out nice. It became one of the greatest success of the time. So probably Glenn Miller's greatest success. So I mean, it's not that because it's an exercise, it's bad. But for me, it's an exercise. For me, the purpose of the exercise is to internalize all those techniques. So later, when you use this exact same technique of using, I don't know, in this case, diminished chord to pass through different other chords, it's natural, you know how it sounds, and then you can navigate through it without thinking of the technique, simply because you just know where to put your fingers, where to write the notes, and all these kind of things. So then you can improvise. And do all these kind of things, which is exactly the same technique, and I just improvise right now. Okay, so you kind of do those to get the technique, and the technique becomes part of you, and then you can use it spontaneously again. At this point, you're writing music.
I definitely think that the point at which you could use things spontaneously without thinking about them is a really nice, liberated point to be at. But I also think, even if something's an exercise, if you like the result, then your creative agency is not dictated by how it felt to write it, but whether you liked it and whether you're going to keep it or not. It's this question of being fit for purpose again. So if he didn't really like the result of Moonlight Serenade, he could have binned it. There's a song that I still play live that was based on a rhythm exercise at guitar college to write a riff in 7/8, and I still play that song.
Yes,
So I did the riff. I liked the riff. I was like, okay, now I'm gonna have some words over the riff. What's the next section? So I never would have written it if it hadn't been an exercise, and that song's really stood the test of time for me. So and because it's got a interesting rhythmic shift, it works really well as a solo piece, and that's something I always think about as a songwriter. It's obviously there are some songs that the dynamic changes you really need a full band to affect them, but if you could write songs and parts that give you other levers of contrast that you can still draw on as a solo performer, then that's really nice if you want to go and play your songs. That's a slightly different topic, but yeah. So I think that's key, that getting over any idea that doing something in a really methodical, like oh, where do I go here? And perhaps not finding it very easy, or not necessarily feeling that it's instinctive is
yes.
No barrier to that thing giving you really great results. And one of the things I really have enjoyed about some of your material I've learned or been exposed to in the past is that you can take quite simple starting points and lead us to a point where we could be making something very complex, and at no point were we waiting for the melody fairy to come and sprinkle melody dust on us. You're just like, do this, then do this, and that's going to give you that. So what do you, for somebody who's never necessarily taken a theory approach to writing melody, what might be a great something they could explore quite easily, in your opinion?
Well, I will start this way. If you never wrote a melody before, the easiest exercise to start, well, there are two exercises to start with. One is transcribe other melodies. So grab a few songs that you like and transcribe the vocal melody. With transcribe, I simply mean find the notes and play it on your guitar. You don't have to write it on the score or do other things. Just play them on your guitar, your piano, whatever instrument you use. Just have an idea of what's happening. And then start noticing what's happening at the beginning of the melody, halfway through the melody, and at the end of the melody. Okay? One of my early composition teacher told me that a melody has to have a beginning, a middle, and an end, which sounds something like silly to say. I mean, of course. But what he meant is that there are specific beginning gestures, there are specific middle melody gesture, and there are specific end of melody gestures. And again, those are only gestures. You can do anything different anytime, but if you do too many things different than the gestures, it starts to sound weird and not like a melody. So what you do is to start to get a feeling for what works at the beginning, at the middle, and at the end of a melody. So for instance, many melodies start with either a long note, just to establish where we are. The note can be held, okay, or it can be repeated with a specific kind of rhythm, or they start with an interval, typically not a step, meaning they start with a sixth, for instance, something like that would be a start of a melody. Okay, there's not something I would put at the end of a melody. I would not put a sixth at the very end of a melody. Usually, again, most of the time, unless the situation requires exactly that. Am I making sense? So you start to get these kind of feelings. The first surprise you're going to notice when you transcribe melodies, especially vocal melodies, is that they don't use that many notes. They don't go all through the scales, okay? And we guitar player tend to go and like play all the notes in a scale, whatever the scale, okay? But vocal melodies will just stay on 1, 2, 3 notes, rarely more, okay? So they will have a very specific choice of those notes. And they will repeat notes a lot, more than what we expect. There will be more notes because people are gonna sing more syllables. More syllable per note, that they're going to be this kind of repetition of attack on the same note, which is totally not natural on an instrument, because somehow when you play an instrument, you want to change note every time. Or at least most people are trained this way. Okay, so you start to break this kind of problem and connect more what's actually happening, what actually sounds good to your ear, to what you do on your instrument or for writing. You're muted, Indiana.
I just really wanted to draw everyone's attention to the point you made about the difference between melodies for voice versus melodies for instrument. There are obviously technical constraints on what our ranges are, but also there's the question of it being fit for purpose, like we said at the beginning. So if there's a vocal melody that's intended to convey some lyrics, it's going to be very hard to make sense of them if they're too fast, or if we're distracted by a melody that's so angular and moving so quickly, or moving in very big leaps, that that we can't follow the words very easily. So that would be another question. And in an arrangement, maybe it's nice to contrast what the voice can do with what the instruments can do. But there's another part to it. It's not just the limitations of the voice as a range and the fact that we need to understand the words, or that's probably going to be a priority in a song with words. It's also that we actually respond differently to human voice versus other instruments. And there's a whole, if you put someone in a brain scanner and you measure how much their neurons fire, we're just wired to respond much more to our own species. And there's even gradations. So the instruments that sound more similar to human voice evoke more, like a cello. You know, there's like a different amount of neurons that fire for a voice, then quite a lot for a cello, and then a bit less for a guitar, although we love guitars. But so that's a kind of interesting point too.
The thing I would like to see this experiment done, for instance, with guitars, but different players or different melodies played on a guitar, because I am absolutely sure that some specific people or some specific solos will be more vocal than other solos. So the cello, I believe you that the cello evokes more the vocal qualities. That's because when you study the cello, they really hammer that into you.
That's true. Like the cello repertoire also kind of, you know, we could discuss the difference in, but that would be a different. That would be a completely different.
But we could stay hours on the cello repertoire. Okay. Also because for all guitar players out there, the cello repertoire pretty much fits your guitar. Okay, so it's either you can fit it exactly as it is, or play it exactly as it is, or just push it up a fifth and then play it as it is. You can play nearly everything a cello can play on your guitar, and it sounds great, and you learn a lot. That said, okay, no, put that question. It's the other one. That's a great question, and I'm going to answer this in a second.
Thank you for that question, because it's a good way to get into this.
Exactly. What's first, chords or melody? Either one. Okay. Now, it really depends, and the thing is that it depends on the musician, depends on you, and it also depends on the theories. Some music theories say the scale comes first, and some music theories say the chords come first, and they've been battling each other forever. And the reality is that either one comes first, depending on how you feel. Okay, you can write either way. You can write the melody first, okay, and then try to fit the chords under the melody. And that's great, because you can fit several different chords or harmonization under the same melody. Okay? Or you can write the chords first and then write the melody. And this feels to most people more technical, more deliberate, less spontaneous. But in reality, many great melodies that sound really spontaneous have been written this way. So the question is, what do you hear first? Okay, when you hear a song, I mean, everybody usually will just answer melodies at this point. Part because that's more salient in their mind, and partly because that's the politically correct answer to give in this period in time, apparently. Okay, while, for instance, I don't know, 40 years ago, 60 years ago, people would have answered chords. Okay. But you really have to start to be aware of what you're feeling when something is playing and see what comes first. And it could be either one, and it could be both, by the way. There are songs where I wrote first the melody and songs where I wrote first the chords. And at the end of the day, you can probably not tell where I started. Okay. Makes sense. So, but the procedure is different. So if you have chords first, and that's what most guitar players do, by the way, at the end of the day, but despite them saying that they hear the melody first, they typically start from chords because that's what they know how to play. So if you start from chords, I mean, you want to get your chords down. Something like that. And then you want to start weaving your melody by hitting the notes of the chord and some other notes around the notes of the chord every time they play. So something like that, or just this. Improvising. Okay, so you decide your chords, and then the chords become the tapestry, and you wave the melody over those chords. And that's something you can do. You train for that. Okay, it's not again. People have always the idea everything has to come spontaneously at first. No, you do your exercises, then you can do it. Okay, and this is simply hitting chord notes and then playing notes around. For people that are wondering right now, no, I'm not always thinking this is the third, this is the first, this is the E, this is the F. After a while, all this blurs away and you just know how it sounds and you just do it. Okay? If you ask me to repeat this, I can't. I need to go and watch the video and transcribe what I did. So that's if you have the chord first. If you have the melody first, then you need to learn what goes under that melody. It's the same procedure, but in reverse. So let's say you have a melody. Okay. So you can do this, but you can also do, say, whatever. Actually, let me change. Okay, so you can start doing this kind of work, and I mean, you can stay here. I can spit out new harmonizations in real time, no problem. Okay, and again, that's something you train to do. You see, you see what are the notes of the melody. If it's the first note of the key, the second note of the key, or if it's a G or if it's an A, you can think about this in different ways, and then you start trying different chords or different part of a chord underneath until something fits. You do this several times. There are exercises to do that, and then you learn to compose that way. Both are great, normal, legit ways. It really depends on you, okay? This is the same question as music first or lyrics first, okay? And it's pretty much, the answer is pretty much the same. Either one, depending on how you like to write, okay? Now, historically, and you can confirm me, but most songs start with the music first and lyrics after. But there have been lots of songs too with lyrics first and music after, or at least that's what I see. You can confirm me or deny.
I think it really depends. And there's partnerships also where one person's always writing the lyrics, one person's always writing the music. I just wanted to make sure people hadn't missed something that wouldn't have meant anything to me when I started out. And you said that writing melodies over the chords involves making sure there's a note from the chord and then some other notes, or that. So I remember when I would listen to music in the 90s when I was at uni, I was like, how do they know that tune goes with those? Like, how? And essentially, when I did learn some music theory, and I realized that if I would play a chord to, like, let's say I played a chord now and everyone on the stream hummed a note that they thought matched that chord, I'm willing to bet a tenner that everyone's singing one of the notes in the chord. And it's obvious when somebody points it out, but it wasn't obvious to me. And so when I would write a song and hum a tune, if I thought the tune matched the chords well enough and that it sounded nice together, I didn't know why. So I was like, well, I magically managed to make that work. Don't know if I can ever do it again. So I just wanted to make sure that people had kind of noticed that point, because it's also the kind of thing that once you know it and understand it, it can be quite obvious, but it's not obvious to begin with. And it's not something that needs to be a constraint, it will reliably give you a feeling of musical resolution. So it's something that you can aim for if you really want to know that something's going to fit. And also on the subject of chords and melody, I was thinking that when I started out, the first song I ever had played on the radio had 25 chords in it, because I really loved psychedelic types of chord progression. And then I would end up with quite sort of weavy melodies because they were following all these chords. So I definitely initially relied on chord progressions that were a little bit adventurous to force me to make melodic movements that would make them work. That was really my kind of main approach for a while. Sorry, I will try and talk a bit slower. Between Tommaso and me, it's
It's a good contest. Yeah, who's fastest?
Yeah.
Who can spit out more words per minute?
Yes. So when I first came to write melodies over a more restrained chord progressions, at that point, I began to think in a more deliberate way about whether the notes were sort of next to each other or whether there were interval steps. And actually, your point about an interval leap being quite a common opening gesture, I immediately thought somewhere over the rainbow and twinkle twinkle and Star Wars and all the rest, and you can immediately identify lots of songs that do that. And downward leaps, down as well, maybe some downward leaps. So that this question of intervals and steps and the distance between the notes isn't one that I had ever thought about, but I think that that's quite a nice usable idea that people can straight away apply in their melody writing. You can even write yourself down a little list of, okay, I'm going to have 3 notes that are step movement and then an interval, or I'm going to do it the other way around, and then you can change the direction, and then you can change the size of the leap, and you're going to generate lots and lots of possibilities very easily. And so that I just wanted to make sure people had kind of noticed that.
Since you mentioned it, just a little curiosity here about upward and downward leaps at the beginning of the melody. I'm noticing that vocal melodies typically leap upwards at the beginning, while instrumental melodies tend to leap downwards more often, probably because upward leaps are easier to sing. I mean, they're not easier to sing materially. It's just that typically most of the vocal exercise have upward leaps. You notice now that most exercise have all those exercises when you warm up your voice.
That is 100% true.
And they always go up. And then so when you get downward melodies, and something like actually what's this? Okay, so, this kind of downward leaps at the beginning of the melody is typically an instrumental melody. I mean, I just thought about that and like, hey, wait, all the melodies that come in my mind with the downward leaps are instrumentals. So here's an idea for everybody. You guys want an original vocal melodies in pop? Because everybody's like, how do I write a new melody in pop? Everybody, all the melodies have already been consumed. Start with a downward leap. It's a move that is pretty rare. In fact, in this moment, I cannot think of a pop song that starts with a downward leap. There must be some.
The Flintstones. I don't know if that counts. Flintstones.
Right. Good. Okay. Good. You got one. Great. Okay. And that's one. And we have to go back to the Flintstones to find one. Okay. True. No, yeah. Okay. But you see, that's a strange way to start. It's a good gesture. It will be very distinctive. Everybody wants to write a pop melody, start with a downward leap and see what happens. I want to go back a moment on the chord notes, just to clarify a few things. The chord notes, it's an exercise, not a rule, not something that has to be there. Yes, like you were saying, if you play a chord, any chord, and then he asks people to sing a note on top, they will sing these or these or these most of the time. It's very rare for an untrained singer to sing a note that is not in the chord, because you naturally try to match what's in the chord. So the chord notes are something that people naturally sing. And when you write melody, it's something natural to hit. When you hit those chord notes, it feels like the melody and the chords that glue together and work with each other. But it's not a rule. And indeed, sometimes you end up with melodies that do not have chord tones. Okay? And those melodies are not bad. Those melodies are not just dissonant. And sometimes you don't even notice they don't have chord notes until you transcribe them. Okay? And there's plenty of them out there. So chord notes are an exercise to get started in making a sense of the melody. But it's definitely not something you have to do afterward and just to check if the melody is good. No, don't do that. If the melody sounds good to you, it's good. Now, to give you an idea, for instance, "Hello" by Adele, the chorus, it's full of notes that are technically not in the chord. The very last note is a fourth over the chord, for instance. There should be some more dissonance. They get away with that because all the chords in the backing track are power chords, not full triads. But if you guys transcribe the melody and transcribe the chords, it's not really hard, okay? As an exercise to the viewer, okay? And you start thinking about what's happening, you see that it's not, as this melody has not been written thinking hitting the chord notes. Okay, now Adele is a trained singer, very trained, okay, and very competent, so she can sing pretty much whatever she wants over that and make it even sound good. But that melody is not as easy to sing, not only for the extension, the power, etc., but just to hit the right note, which is not a note of the chord, okay? And that melody actually is pretty interesting and original because of that. Now, a lot of people are listening to this and thinking, no, pop is never original. Pop is just commercial music. But honestly, I disagree. Okay, there's good stuff in pop and there's bad stuff in pop. And you underestimate pop at your own risk because there's plenty of stuff to be learned by listening to that stuff.
I would just like to add to the point about the Adele song. You know, it's intended to be quite emotional. Hello from the other side. Must have cried 1,000 times. And you know, it's a kind of quite heartfelt. And again, this isn't a universal rule, but if you are finishing with a note from the chord while that chord is sounding, musically that gives us a certain amount of resolution, and that can correlate with an emotional feeling of resolution. And so again, this isn't, you know, a kind of fail-safe thing, but in that sense that there isn't any musical resolution, and we also do not feel emotional resolution. We feel emotional unresolution. We feel tension, and that's what she's going for. She wants to evoke a level of emotional tension. So these the things that musically resolve in a way that we expect can create a sense of emotional sort of landing as well, and the things that don't can create a sense of emotional tension. And one way you can use this in your melody writing is either not resolve it at all, like Adele, or really delay the resolve, or introduce, you know, have a certain number of consonant chord tones, but then have quite a lot of more gritty ones. In fact, yeah, I mean, blues, if I wanted to train my melody writing now, blues is quite a good template to write over, because it tolerates a lot of tension, and it's quite enjoyable tension as well. So writing over a dominant blues and then including a lot of flat thirds and flat sevens would be a way to enjoyably play around with musical tension.
Exactly. That dissonance is not bad. Dissonance is drama, and you should put dissonance in your songs, and you should get used to dissonance too. And yeah, so again, it's chord tones, and anything related to chord tones, writing melodies or writing harmonization or anything, or improvising. It's an exercise. An exercise that's supposed to be in a series of other exercises that take you up to full, complete freedom, and not the guiding principle of writing melodies as it seems to be right now. I mean, if you go on YouTube right now, everybody who talks about chord tone is telling you, no, that's the guiding principle. That's what you have to do. Okay. It's just one step of many. So, and see, that's also how you end up with people telling, again, very common on YouTube right now, theory just imprison you, you should not learn theory, etc., etc. Well, yes, if you take theory, you take all those steps that take you to complete freedom, you take only one of them, you take it away from the context, and then you say, this is the absolute rule. Of course, after 5 minutes, people will say, this is just imprisoning you. You just took like 1% of the whole thing and then made it look like it's everything. Okay, so there is this double thing going on, and it's been a couple of years, 2 or 3 years now, that this has been going worse and worse. And from this point of view, that people misunderstand how this whole music theory works, which is supposed to be a path to take you from not knowing music to complete freedom and possibly intuitive freedom, and then misunderstanding how this works, and then other people say, no, theory just imprison you, it's just this, and then just a bunch of rules, and it's a disaster in a sense, because you can hear that people are composing worse and worse music. Like it's
Well, the problem is, if there's no theory, what does that leave? It leaves 100% instinct. Now, instinct is fine, but it's not, but it's finite.
Yep.
So it's like you're opening your store cupboard and you've got like beans and tomatoes and coconut milk and various spices. If you're never putting anything new in that store cupboard, the flavors are all going to be the same.
Yep.
And theory and all of these exercises are like giving yourself more ingredients, or David Lynch would describe it as stocking the pond.
Yes.
Lots of ideas, fishes of ideas.
Exactly.
Yeah, so I think so it's interesting because obviously when we're talking about melodies, the pitches and the movement of the pitches is tends to be the first thing most of us think about. And what scale I'm going to use and what chord tones, not passing notes, how close together they're going to be. But what maybe more unexpected ways might there be of thinking about melodies that we might not be the first things we think about? I mean, are there kind of rhythmic approaches that we could take? What other slightly more unexpected techniques or approaches or perspectives would you draw our attention to?
Well, every melody has a climax. Okay, maybe not literally every melody, but if you look at the melody, not all the notes have the same importance, and some of them have more emotional charge, are more emotionally charged. Okay, doesn't mean the other notes are useless. The other notes are there to set up that emotional charge and to release it just after. But every note that doesn't do that, every note that doesn't set up the emotional charge or helps that emotional charge, should go. Okay, so that's one thing. It's when they say play less notes, they don't mean less note period. They mean less useless notes. Okay, eliminate the useless notes, keep the useful note. If you take the Adele melody, which I'm not gonna sing, especially because you have in mind Adele and then you have in mind Diana singing it, and I cannot match either of them, like by far. So I'm not singing it, but you can hear that the emotion is growing, and in the last note, okay, that hit the notes and goes down a little bit, that's the emotional charge. Like that the high note is the emotional charge, and then there's this little drop at the end. Okay, like somebody trying to reach and not quite reaching. Okay. All the notes before that go up serves to set up that emotional charge in that note. That's the climax of the melody. It's a short melody, it's few notes, but it's a complete melody in this sense. People seem to forget to put climaxes in their melodies, and then they complain that the melodies don't sound good. That's typically what is missing. So you guys want to start thinking, where do you want people to get the feelings? Okay, in what point of your melody you want people to get the feelings? And there's not a right answer. It could be the beginning, at the end, in the middle. It's typically just half in the second half of the melody, but it could be anywhere. Okay, and how you set it up. How do you get there? What notes you need to play before the note with the feeling, okay, to get there to enhance that? And what you need to play afterwards to make it work, Okay, so it's a bit more deliberate, but again, it's deliberate so that you get a feeling of the whole thing, and then eventually you just do it by instinct. And that's something to think about. Okay, what makes a climax? It could be sometimes it's the highest note in the melody. Okay, sometimes it's the longest note in the melody. Okay, sometimes there's something else setting up the emotion. Sometimes if you look it on paper, there's nothing special about that note that you can identify. It's not the highest, it's not the longest, it's not the strangest, it's not the most dissonant, but somehow the feelings hit there. What happened? Try to figure it out. Try to write another melody that does the same. So, okay, you guys want to start doing that. So, coming back to the first thing I recommended, transcribe a few melodies and then try to understand where is the note with the feelings, okay, or the notes with the feelings. Where do you feel the emotion in the melody? In the whole thing? Where do you feel it the most? What is the climax? And then try to see what's happening in this. Now, the beautiful thing about transcribing melodies and doing that, and that's something nobody can give you. The beautiful thing is that you are going to pick the melodies you like. You're not going to transcribe the melodies you don't like. Okay, you're going to transcribe the melodies you like. And so you're going to start developing exactly the right amount, the right tricks and the right ideas and the right tips and the right whatever for the music you like. So if you like jazz, you're going to transcribe jazz melodies. You're going to find what makes jazz melody works. If you like pop, you're going to transcribe pop melodies. And you're going to make sense of what make those melody works, which is not exactly the same because, again, the styles are different, okay? If you and you're going to transcribe only the best melodies, the melody that you like best in these styles. Make sense? So you do that, you are developing your own style. You are developing your own taste. Nobody can transcribe those melodies for you. Nobody can do this for you because it's going to rob you of the ability of developing your own style in writing melodies. So I totally recommend you guys to transcribe a little, at least a few melodies. Okay? Diana,
I
what do you
definitely
think?
second that. But I am also going to give you some of my favorite result things that I think give one a great result quite quickly. So one of them is reserving a note. It's the note you haven't heard yet in the song. So we might have a verse. So in terms of how we would set up a more emotional moment, and I'm sure Tommaso is going to have some great things to add to this, or like what are the things that can help contribute to the feeling of something being a peak moment. So one, maybe it's the highest note we've heard thus far. If you just listen very casually to the radio, the vast majority of pop songs have got the verse melodies here, and then it's like goes up for the chorus melody. Sometimes they just flip it in the octave, that's very common in pop. But it doesn't, it could be that it's the highest note we've heard so far. And actually in Hey Jude, he kind of does that. It goes, hey Jude, don't make it bad, take a sad song and make it better, to remember to let her into your heart, and then you can start, and then it kind of goes off in the chorus. So he's kind of doing this every time, going to a slightly higher note than we've heard before, and it does build a drama. So there's the register of the note, but it could also be simply a pitch that we haven't heard yet. Maybe I've been writing a melody on two notes, and it's going da 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 da. Didn't mean to do Girl from Ipanema, but that's what came out. And then another note comes in, or more notes come in the next section, and that always is going to give us a sense of increasing interest. Another, so that's two. So could be a new pitch register, just a pitch we haven't heard yet, whether it's higher or not higher. It could be the combination of a particular pitch and a chord. We haven't heard that note with that chord before. That can give us interest, and we could also think about how long or short the notes are and where they are in relation to the pulse. And this is something I'm really obsessed with at the moment, because it's not something I ever really thought about that much, and especially in genres like blues, where you're operating within certain conventions, and so in a sense there are musical parameters that you are going to kind of observe. Like, of course, there's lots of extra cool notes we can put in and cool chords, but there's still sort of parameters we're going to observe. And the thing that can really give us an awful lot of juice in that is rhythmic variation. And this is also something I learned from you, I think, or you certainly gave me this idea at some point. And if you ways of increasing rhythmic tension can be as simple as moving something off the strong beats and onto the weak beats, or onto in between the beats. So instead of being a and then of course might be da da da. Now we have those longer notes that are on the strong beats, and it always gives us a feeling of release. And it's such a funny trick. And so I just think that's so cool, because it's not something that we would notice until we counted it out. We know how it feels, but we've never kind of, until you work it out, you don't actually fully understand it. And a great example for this is Dangerous Woman by Ariana Grande, because she has all these little ba-da-da-da-da, ba-da-da-da-da, ba-da-da-da-da in the verse. She doesn't start on beat one. There's lots of little short staccato notes, and then she moves for these longer notes with the onto beat one. You make me feel like a dangerous woman. It's all on the kind of the quarter notes rather than those little short notes. So that's one of my things that I'm currently very intrigued by. But I'm sure you also have a what little nugget would you give people if they want to go and try some melody writing right away?
One trick I like is to set up the first few notes as like in promising a resolution on a specific position in the melody. So like you're working up to get a specific note, and then you don't play that note. Okay, you play a different note than what people expect in the resolution point, and play the right note later. And you can make you can play this game over and over and over and over. Okay. Of course, in a pop song you have 3 minutes. You cannot go beyond that. I mean, it's hard to go much longer than that. But the idea is to promising a note or promising a specific resolution and changing it. It's an old idea. And then, an example is Tristan und Isolde by Wagner. It's a 4-hour opera. They set it up from the beginning. The very first few notes are promising a resolution that doesn't come. And in all the opera, they get the same melody and the same chord progression, and they get there, and they don't get the resolution. And halfway to the second act, there are 3 acts. It's super long. There is a big climatic scene where they are getting there, and there is somebody barging in the door, and the enemy army is coming. Okay, and then they change key in that moment. So you spend all 4 hours. I mean, assuming you like Wagner and you get the melody, but you spend the whole 4 hours yearning for that note of resolution, and it never gives it to you until the last 2 minutes. And when it finally hits you, like, finally, it's like not breathing for 4 hours, essentially. And again, Wagner is not exactly the most popular choice today. Okay, and it's a long opera that has beautiful moments, but like they say, terrible quarter of an hour. So okay, there's lots of spoken parts, etc. But yeah, and it throws some key changes in a song. That's a great way to make the song fresher. And see, that's another thing. Sometimes they're promising a resolution, and in that moment of resolution, rather than giving the note, you change key. Okay. Many pop chord progression do exactly that. I don't know. Think the famous one is "Living on a Prayer" by Bon Jovi, just after the solo, and the chorus comes back again, but changes key. And you were expecting the chorus in the original key, but they're playing it higher, and so this gets kind of a different expectation. You were expecting it to resolve one way; it resolves a different way. Just gives a different kind of resolution. Another one is "My Heart Will Go On," sung by Celine Dion, the Titanic theme. Okay, and when there is the key change on the last, after the second chorus, there is a key change where she goes up 2 whole tones. That's another thing. Is promising you a note and is giving you another one, but that's still a note that resolves, but not the note you were expecting. So it's kind of a different kind of resolution. So key changes can be used artistically in a song when you play with setup and resolution. Okay, and that's the way you should be using them. If you just put a modulation in your song just because, it never works. Diana, you have something to say?
I'm just a fan of key changes. And actually, Ray Davis uses them in a very classy way in Waterloo Sunset. I often think he's one of the underrated songwriters of the 60s. We can have you know, you can all argue with me about this, but you know, between the Beatles and the Stones and the Kinks, they got less press, but actually he does some really classy and sophisticated, effortless things, and like, you know. Anyway, not our core topic today. So yes, I basically agree with all of that, and we could stay here definitely for hours discussing many things. But we are going to have to wrap up. Tommaso, thank you so much for coming on and talking to us about these things. I always really enjoy the chance to catch up with you on these and many other musical topics. And
Yep.
actually, Tommaso has something for us. Now, because
Yes.
he
Sure.
has, I'm going to just, hang on a minute, need to remove,
No, it's
show you.
okay. That's okay. I leave
There.
everything this way. That's perfect. This is a free ebook that you guys can download. It's something that you're gonna find useful if you're a guitar player. This helps you learning the notes on your guitar. Now, it looks like something impossible to do. When people tell you learn the notes on your guitar, it's like there's a lot of memorization, and then I'm gonna forget it, and all this kind of thing. And then what's the use of it? Well, let me tell you. First of all, it's easy if you go at it the right way with the right set of exercises that is gradual, start from zero and gradually goes up to full memorization. And you just need to invest 5 minutes a day for, let's say, a few weeks, okay, a couple of months, give or take. 5 minutes a day, no more. Just do the exercises. Don't worry if you are remembering things. Don't worry if it sticks or not. Just do the exercises. By the end of those few weeks, you have all the notes memorized. They just jump up at you like they're written on the fretboard. Is this useful? Well, everything I did before, okay, everything I played today works because I know exactly where my notes are and I don't have to think about it. Okay, I know where all the G's are on my guitar. I know where all the A's are, and I'm spending literally zero amount of time thinking where the notes are because they are completely memorized with instant recall. That's the system I use for myself. That's the system I use for my student. This ebook has been downloaded at this point thousands and thousands and thousands of times, and people keep writing me that it works. I am fairly sure it works at this point. Okay, so grab it. It's free, no risk. It's there for you.
And the link to it should be in the description as well as on the screen. And I have something for you, which is 5 Ways to Write Great Lyrics. And for those of you who might need some words for your melodies, this takes you through all the stuff I wish I'd known when I started out with writing lyrics, and all the things that you can do to train yourself to be able to write better lyrics more freely, to understand why a lyric might not be working and what you can do to address it. If you've done a first draft and you're like, I like the idea for this song, but that section is kind of annoying me. It gives you ways that you can perhaps give feedback to fellow bandmates and collaborators, and it gives you a slightly more of an understanding of how language works on the, just like we were talking about, certain notes and certain note movements are going to produce an emotional response in us, generally speaking. There are certain ways of arranging language that also do that. And I didn't know any of this when I started out, but I just was interested, and over the years I learned more about it, and it's fascinating to me that we can create these effects by the way we handle language and notes. So go and grab that. We would both love you to enjoy your notes and words. And thank you very much to everyone for coming. And of course, thank you, Tommaso, for everything that you have shared with us today.
Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure.
It's a pleasure. And thank you guys for coming along and giving us your questions, which we always enjoy receiving. So if anyone's watching this later on a replay, go and grab the things and enjoy them. Take care, everybody. Bye for now.